Hi, I'm Mimi Carter. Welcome to Speaking Truth to Power, why purpose-driven communications is more important than ever before. I am Mimi Carter. I'm the U.S. General Manager at Proof Strategies and the founder of DC Communicators. Thank you so much for coming today. I am delighted with the panel that we have with us today. As we're all at home, there are often noises associated with being in your home and broadcasting live, so we'll try to mitigate them as much as possible. Moving on. Proof Strategies is a digital and PR marketing firm in Washington, D.C. We work with value-driven organizations and leaders to affect positive change. DC Communicators, which was founded in 2013, is a network of 6,000, I know, 6,000, which is unbelievable to me, of communications professionals in the Washington, D.C. area. And we get together 2 to 4 times a year to talk about trends in communications, digital marketing, and public relations. We've had speakers from the Red Cross to Goodwill to the National Museum of World War II history. We've had all sorts of leaders in all types of spaces. So if you ever have an idea for a DC Communicators event, please let me know, or if you're interested in speaking, please let me know. I'm delighted with the panel that we have today for our event. And what I'm going to do is introduce each of them or have them introduce themselves to you. But first we have Germanique Ulmer. So Germanique, can you say hello?
I'm happy to. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm in Los Angeles, so I'll say good morning, good afternoon. I'm Germanique Ulmer, the Managing Director of Social Impact at the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art in Los Angeles, California. And I'm really excited to be here. I have had my 20-year career working for nonprofits and local government, and I look forward to talking about purpose-driven communications today.
Thank you. Next, we have Ed Wyatt, former Senior Communications Officer at the Gates Foundation. Ed, can you say hello?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ed Wyatt, and as Mimi said, former Senior Communications Officer at the Gates Foundation. I left there October 1st when I ran up against a term limit on my appointment of 3 years. So I am now looking for the next thing, in fact.
Thank you. We also have David Ringer, who I'm delighted to have here today.
Hi, Mimi. Hi, everybody. Yes, my name is David Jeffrey Ringer, and I'm Chief Network Officer at National Audubon Society. So I oversee all of our communications, from our digital work to our media relations to our editorial program with Audubon Magazine and the website. I also work on all of our grassroots initiatives across the country and some of our other program areas, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And Rajesh, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rajesh Merchandani. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the United Nations Foundation, working to lead a team of skilled communicators and partnership managers every day so that we can help the UN tackle urgent problems and drive global progress together. Great to talk with you.
Thank you so much. I am so excited about this panel, and I'm delighted with the case studies that they're presenting today. They are really compelling, and I think you will walk away with some real lessons learned. So it's a great panel with some great case studies. So it's a terrific group. So thank you all for being here today. Just really briefly, I did want to talk about what we mean by purpose-driven communications, because I think there's many interpretations. And so I think if we can sort of talk about why it's happening now, why it's more important than ever before, I think it could be really helpful in setting the stage for some of these case studies. When we think about purpose-driven communications right now, we think about organizations and leaders who are really in the midst of a rapidly changing environment, but rapidly changing expectations from our members, from our board members, from our employees, and from our funders. And so with that comes a real onus on communicating impact and change in a way that's authentic and transparent. Gone are the days, if you will, of just doing a pro bono program or a volunteer day. And I wanted to start the event with this quote because I thought it was really meaningful. Every decision should be looked at in terms of purpose. Some decisions may be purpose neutral, but purpose is certainly not just a marketing issue or positioning of your brand image. Purpose should impact every aspect of the firm. And I say this with this quote today because all our communications efforts and our campaigns can only be as impactful as the mission and the vision and the values that our organization represents. So that can be a difficult space to be in if you're a communications leader, if perhaps the two aren't aligned. But we're going to talk about ways in which these leaders have really leveraged the value of their mission and vision. And then we'll also discuss questions on how to manage communications and impact and efforts when maybe that vision or mission is less clear than you would like it to be. I did also want to point out that there's a great report that I will send to you after this event. It's done by Ernst & Young. It's a survey of more than 400 leaders. And when they talk about purpose-driven communications, why there's a bit of a struggle. So 89% of executives surveyed said that a strong sense of collective purpose drives employee satisfaction. It can affect your ability to innovate and be flexible and provide solutions to members, and obviously has helped a number of the leaders speaking here today. But what's difficult, or what we've seen sometimes, is that it can't just be a marketing angle. It really has to be a program that's embedded in your performance reviews, in your staff meetings, in any funding proposal that you write. So sometimes what the report said was 46% said their company has a strong sense of purpose, while 44% said that the company was still trying to develop one. So if you're in that position, this Ernst & Young report might be helpful to you because it's very organizationally written. Okay, so moving on, now that we've sort of identified what purpose-driven communications is, I'm gonna have Germanique kick us off with her case study for the African American Cultural Heritage Fund.
Thank you, Mimi, and I'm just thrilled to be here to have this conversation. Purpose has just been part of how I've guided my career, and certainly the National Trust for Historic Preservation, where I formerly worked, really has built, its DNA is built around purpose. And so this Action Fund is a great case study and example of that work. So the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, which is quite the mouthful, was launched in November of 2017 by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And again, I'm speaking about my former job. Just wanted to make that clear as a caveat for folks. This campaign was really, it was launched in the aftermath of the country reeling from the events that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia in that previous August. So just think about that. This was 3 years ago that white nationalists marched on that city and violence and death ensued. And the National Trust had long been wrestling with the inequities of representation and preservation of African American history in our country. There are less than 10% of the historic sites on the National Register of Historic Places that represent women or people of color. And that is shocking. So we saw what happened in Charlottesville as a wake-up call to really figure out how can we change this narrow view of our history that was holding us back. And we've been turning over our public spaces to this lost cause of the Confederacy without really having another perspective represented. And so this campaign really was that opportunity to think about how can we talk about the overlooked historic places that talk about African-American history, excellence, and achievement, and not that narrative that we only often hear when we think about African-American history, which is about slavery and the downtrodden of this community of people, of which I am a member of. So we're going to stay on this slide, Rachel. With the coming together of 5 of the nation's largest foundations, the National Trust announced this $25 million fund, this initiative that is dedicated to preserving African-American historic sites all over the country. And it was really a call for projects so that we can start to fund projects all over the country. The National Trust really had the credibility to do this work because of the work that had been happening at the organization for many, many years. The outreach and engagement with preservation projects all over the country, the realization that even in our 11 most endangered historic places list that we weren't representing sites of diversity when we announced those lists over the last 25, 30, 40, 50 years of the National Trust. So this work had been happening already. So it made the vision of this campaign authentic to who we are and our ability to do that. We just really had that credibility. It also helped that we were able to launch this campaign with a well-known ambassador and the actress and director Felicia Rashad, who had her own authentic connection to the work. She and her family had been preserving a space at a place in Chester, South Carolina called Brainard Institute for a long, long time. And so it was great to be able to bring her on board as part of this, as well as a number of other ambassadors and folks who were part of this campaign. Next slide, please. So we announced the fund in all the traditional ways with aggressive press outreach and an online PSA that featured our brand ambassador, Felicia Rashad. And we deployed this hashtag, Tell the Full History, and really just went all in when we announced this campaign. We launched it with full social media, with the PSA. Our national conference is held every November. And so we saw our national conference as an opportunity to bring this to the main stage when our president and CEO spoke about preservation of this country. So the timing was just perfect to announce this campaign. Next slide, please. So there were a number of challenges, like every PR campaign. This particular campaign was one in which we needed to sustain the buzz for many, many years. And that can be difficult. We had a goal of $25 million that we wanted to raise, and we were still fundraising for that to reach that goal. We had a plan to announce recipients of these grants each year of the campaign for the next 5 years until the money ran out. And then we also, as we think about the audience and wanting to be able to reach a key audience, the National Trust has an average member who's 80 years old and white. And we knew that this campaign was not for our average member. And so with this campaign, we really sought to grow the diversity of our audience and reach a much younger audience of community activists. And that was one of our challenges because this was a space that we certainly wasn't as familiar with and we needed to really focus on. We also was working with a group of influencers that we wanted to leverage, and we need to figure out how do we work with them effectively so that can be the right advocate for what we were trying to achieve. And then how do we compel people to action around this? You know, is it just taking a pledge? Did we want them to be able to share their own stories like Ms. Rashad did about a place that matters to them? So that was really significant. And then not unlike any other PR campaign, we needed to figure out how do we break through the noise, because as compelling as we felt like this is, there's so many other compelling things that are happening in our country all the time. And so that was certainly a challenge that we had. Next slide, please. So part of our solution and strategy included deploying a high-profile advisory council. So I already mentioned Ms. Felicia Rashad. There were several others who we were very fortunate to be able to work with, including the head of the Ford Foundation, Darren Walker, who really helped to spearhead a lot of the philanthropic efforts around this campaign for us. Brian Stevenson, who you guys may know from Just Mercy, Dr. Lonnie Bunch, Ava DuVernay, Dr. Skip Gates. We had a really amazing roster of high-profile council members who were perfect for us in terms of helping to think through strategy for the campaign and also as a source of funds. One of the things we also did was deploy really strategic media moments that were tied to national months or days of recognition. So we did things like release an op-ed on Martin Luther King's birthday in Time to talk about this campaign. During Black History Month, there's a special edition of USA Today that comes out. We put out a full page ad in that special edition about the campaign. We also released a PSA, which I'll show you in just a second, during Black History Month as well, that really kind of brought up the profile of some of our influencers to help really bring this home for the audience that we were trying to reach. And Black Music Month, which is in June, we announced a partnership with 4 artists to preserve the childhood home of Nina Simone in Tryon, North Carolina. And it got an article in Billboard magazine, which is, I believe, a first for the National Trust to be in Billboard, which is kind of cool. So, you know, again, we use these natural moments that we have as PR professionals to be able to amplify this story in really strategic ways and really be creative about bringing the campaign to life. The other way that we tried to be creative is also in our partnerships. So Google Arts and Culture was an opportunity that we had to be able to bring to life a historic site, the historic estate of Madam C.J. Walker, who I hope you will look up and learn more about her story. We created this reality tour at our booth in Essence Festival. So we went to Essence Festival in New Orleans through a partnership that we had with Essence Communications. Essence Communications publishes the premier magazine for Black women in this country, and they hold one of the largest festivals in the country in New Orleans every year. And it was on their 24th anniversary of that festival that we brought this campaign down to New Orleans to be able to talk about the need to preserve African-American historic places. We went to our audience. We knew that that was where we needed to be able to talk about this campaign. And what better place than to be in a city that had brought 500,000 African-American women to learn about their history, to experience a bunch of wonderful sessions. And so that's where we needed to be. So we arrived in New Orleans and we announced the inaugural class of grant recipients as part of the campaign in 2018. And our message really was about you did this to that community, how we were able to identify these important places through the work of the community. So these were some of the ways that we thought creatively about how we can talk about this campaign. Next slide. So the thing that we did with the PSA was we really wanted to be home.
I'm Felicia Rashad. Marcus Scribner here. Tia Maureen Hardrick. And a historic landmark that has greatly impacted my life is the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Most people are familiar with this being the location where Dr. King was assassinated, but it has since been transformed into the National Civil Rights Museum. Brainerd Institute was founded during Reconstruction for the education of descendants of freed Africans.
This cute little church in Eleuthera, Bahamas, where my great-grandmother built enough faith and courage to migrate over to Miami, a gateway to America for a lot of Caribbean immigrants.
West Angeles Church in Los Angeles, California, founded in 1943, offers a safe space for people to share their beliefs, no matter the color of their skin.
These places are our history. These places are my history.
This is my history.
My history.
Please join me.
Join me.
And the National Trust for Historic Preservation in telling the full history.
You have to love audio on Zoom. Germanique, you wanted to say a couple sort of lead-in sentences to that.
Yes, thank you for that. So essentially with this PSA, which we launched on social media during Black History Month, we really wanted to feel kind of homegrown. This was shot by the talent themselves. Something that we did even pre-COVID, when we could actually get together, we did this in a way that we wanted to make it feel really authentic. And to further the awareness of the work that we were doing. And we was really looking for folks who had an actual authentic connection to a place. And so that's really what this PSA was intended to do. And so this is just one example of one of the ways that we wanted to kind of think creatively about telling the story and amplifying this. I think the other thing that I will say is that we really got lucky with the movie, The Green Book, that came out, which many of you may have seen in the theaters. It was nominated for an Oscar with Mahershala Ali. And once that movie started to be promoted, it was another opportunity for us to talk about how important it is to preserve and protect historic places across the country. We were able to connect with the production company and talk about ways in which we can work together to tell that story, them from a perspective of promoting the movie, us from a perspective of bringing more applicants to the process. So, you know, when we get lucky in PR when these things happen that you don't know are going to happen, and it just makes your campaign even that more rich. And that's exactly what happened to us with that film coming out right around the time that we were about to announce the first round of grants. So the results of this campaign for the National Trust were really remarkable. We were covered quite extensively throughout the campaign with over 500 and counting news outlets, because this campaign is still going on. I'm no longer there, but they're still doing the work. Over 500 million media impressions. I mentioned the Time op-ed around Martin Luther King's birthday, but we also got a number of features in other outlets, including a feature story in Essence magazine, which was great, and a great lead up to that presence that we had at the festival. Some of the largest social media engagement that we had ever had to date for the organization happened around this. We got offered a prime spot at Essence Festival on their center stage to talk about this campaign. And this is a huge, huge deal for a nonprofit organization to be able to get that kind of presence when mostly corporate sponsors of the festival are the ones that you see up on stage, or really, really big celebrities are the ones you see up on stage. So for a nonprofit to be able to get up on center stage and really spotlight a campaign like this was just a wonderful opportunity and a partnership that we were able to take advantage of. Passed out 5,000 pieces of material, had those personal interactions with folks, more funding started to come in, and we were pleased to see over 800 applications come in for the first round of grants from 46 states around the country. Next slide. So some of the lessons learned from the campaign for us, there's a lot of lessons learned, but I'll just talk about these two. We realized that it was just better for us to double down on what we do well. And what I mean by that was just our energy was best spent in the work that we know best as a communications and a PR team, and that we really hired the help that we needed to be able to do some of the things that we wanted to do around this campaign. So finding and using influencers, that's something that we didn't typically do a lot in our PR work at the National Trust. So we found the sources and the resources to be able to do that well. We certainly had some grand plans around engaging certain audiences. We dropped those plans when we realized that that was going to take up too much time around the other work that we wanted to do to really promote the grants and to get more applicants in. We had to balance that internal skill with our engagement capacity. The other lesson that we learned during this process is to always have a backup plan. So we had great hopes to have Ms. Felicia Rashad with us in New Orleans at Essence Festival, and unfortunately that did not happen. But we were able to pull together a really, really compelling virtual experience for festival goers that was interesting enough. And we had a message that was powerful enough that allowed us to couple all these things together and package them together in a way that allowed the experience to not be diminished by what we had hoped to be a different approach around that. So thank you for letting me talk about this, and I look forward to answering any questions that you all have about the campaign. I'm gonna kick it back to Mimi.
Great. Dominique, thank you. That was terrific. And we already have a really great question in the queue, but let's hold on to that and let's move to Ed Wyatt next to talk about the Grand Challenge Gates program next, because I think people's questions will morph and change as they go through these case studies. Ed, do you want to kick us off on the Grand Challenge?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ed Wyatt, and I'm just a recently departed Senior Communications Officer at the Gates Foundation. And I'm here today to talk about, of course, purpose-driven communications as practiced at the foundation. So I wanted to start by emphasizing the foundation's mission, which is, as Bill and Melinda Gates often stated, every person deserves the chance to lead a healthy, productive life. So a little more than 2 years ago, the Foundation's US program started a new effort in economic mobility and opportunity, trying to ensure that there are more public and private actors working together to dramatically increase mobility from poverty. And one of the priorities of that program is increasing public understanding of poverty by changing the tone and the nature of the conversation around issues of economic mobility. Now, so the challenges we faced in kicking off that effort were, we knew we had to work to shift the narrative around poverty from one that focused on common negative stereotypes, for example, that people in poverty are lazy or that they don't want to be successful, to something that more accurately portrays and explains why people fall into poverty and how long they stay there and how they typically get out of economic distress. So the foundation's first major effort toward that goal was a grand challenge. And that is a platform that has been used by the Gates Foundation over the last 15 years to attack seemingly insolvable problems affecting global health and development. They've tackled challenges like reinventing the toilet to work in places without sewer systems or running water. But this was the first time that the foundation had undertaken a grand challenge on a domestic issue. And we in the Economic Mobility and Opportunity Program knew that if we were being given access to this powerful tool, we had to make an impact, a big impact. So our task was to recruit a diverse array of advocates to talk about why and how the narrative around poverty could shift, while also emphasizing some key points. We had to make clear that we knew that we were not going to solve the problem of poverty simply by changing the narrative around poverty. Getting people to talk differently about a problem is not the same as resolving the issue. And we also had to dispel the feeling that now that the Gates Foundation had decided to tackle poverty, that we were going to show all of you people who've worked on poverty for decades just how it's done. Unfortunately, that's a common reaction that often accompanies efforts by the Gates Foundation to move into new strategies. And finally, we also believed strongly that when it comes to telling the stories, we needed to include people with lived experience in poverty. So to look at our solutions and strategies, how did we reach those storytellers? And you can show to the next slide, please, I think. We had a challenge. We couldn't pitch to major national media because at the same time, the foundation's flagship Goalkeepers event was going on and the foundation was trying to keep focus on that. So I decided to try something that we'd never done before. I placed an exclusive article with a Hollywood Reporter. Now, the Hollywood Reporter, I know as a former reporter who covered the television business, would reach a Los Angeles-based crowd of professional storytellers and would be seen by national publications then who might pick up and amplify the message. And that strategy had the added benefit that other publications I think are more likely to follow a story that appears somewhere that targets a different audience, as the Hollywood Reporter does. We also employed several other tactics, including shooting 30-second videos of prominent people who've worked on issues of poverty, encouraging people to apply and running those in social media and in paid spots across the web. We use people like Barbara Ehrenreich, the author of Nickel and Dimed, which was a best-selling account of her foray into working class life, and Arthur Brooks, the former head of the American Enterprise Institute, because we knew that he could reach conservative audiences, which is a group that we wanted to reach to. And I want to show you one of those spots that features Saru Jurayaman, who is the head of the Restaurant Opportunity Center, which works to improve the employment situations of food service workers. So if we can show that video.
The life of a low-wage worker is a life of struggle, hustle, and stress. Incredible amounts of stress. So much of America is really struggling, if not in poverty, then just above it. We need storytellers who will partner with those in poverty, who will recognize the value, the intelligence, the skills, the thoughtfulness of those in poverty, and the need for them to actually drive narrative shift in this country.
So in addition to the videos, we also conducted a series of workshops around the country, and we asked people who were interested in the narrative change effort to come and talk about how they and others might approach the project. In that effort, we particularly emphasized to the attendees the necessity of including people with lived experience in poverty as part of their submissions. So if we look at the results of the campaign, and the next slide, the results, I think, were somewhat remarkable. We attracted 1,225 submissions. Now, in the roughly 200 grand challenges that the Gates Foundation has sponsored over the last 15 years, only in 5 instances have more than 1,000 people applied. So our response was so big that we were able to encourage several other foundations to join us by contributing money and publicizing the efforts. And we made, in the end, 28 grants of $100,000 each, which was nearly 3 times our original plan. Among the submissions we got and funded, one group intends to document the lives of household workers by giving video cameras to those workers and training them how to document parts of their day to illustrate what life is like as an hourly worker with no benefits and no guarantees around work schedules. Another is creating a podcast around the experience of low-wage workers who have been greatly affected by the COVID pandemic. So what lessons did we learn? On the next slide. The videos created very high click-through rates, and the workshops helped to excite and motivate potential applicants. We didn't think big enough, however, I don't believe. By the time we saw the number of applications that we received, it was too late to attract even more funders and further grow the number of grants being offered. On the other hand, we were successful in that a significant number of applicants and a majority of those awarded grants included as part of their proposal the involvement of people with lived experience in poverty. So I'll stop there, but I first want to emphasize again how the effort reflected the values and missions of the Gates Foundations. By turning the spotlight to people with lived experience in poverty, we've been able to give voice to the idea that every person deserves the chance to lead a healthy and productive life. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Ed. That was great. And really interesting too, as you comment about the fact that the most impactful proposals actually came from people living in poverty. So it was really a testament to the campaign that you were able to reach that very targeted audience. Okay, let's move to the next one. David Ringer. And the Audubon Society has been going through a tremendous amount of change in the last 6, 8, 10 months. And I'm really excited to have David here to sort of talk to us and with us some of the changes that this 130-year-old institution is making. David.
Thank you, Mimi. Thanks again for having me. It's an honor to be here with you and alongside Ed and Germanique and Rajesh. Yes, so how does a century-plus-old organization that focuses on the environment, but most people strongly associate with birds, we have a deeply bipartisan membership base, how do we face this generational moment of reckoning around race in this country? And what is our role in that debate? That's what we ran headlong into this year. So on the next slide, I'll tee this up with something that all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. So on the left there, that's Christian Cooper's story. I'm sure you saw it in the news or on social media as it was happening at the end of May. Christian Cooper is a member of the Audubon Society, one of about 2 million strong nationwide. He's also on the governing board of our independent chapter in New York City. So as many of you may know, Audubon has about 450 chapters nationwide, and Christian Cooper helps lead one of those. So when his story went viral on Memorial Day, it really touched a nerve. There had been another wave of killings of unarmed Black people across the country, documented through video and social media. We're very incredibly thankful that Christian Cooper was unharmed physically in the encounter that he experienced. But as you may recall or may not, time is pretty distorted for many of us these days. George Floyd's murder was actually later on the same day, May 25th of this year. And so within hours, the video that Christian Cooper's sister had shared on Twitter was everywhere. It was on the morning shows the next morning. All kinds of news outlets, large and small, were covering it. And then it quickly became clear that this was not only an isolated incident, but was linked to a significant growing pattern across the country. So our immediate instinct was not, should we do something, but what and how? It was clear from the moment that we learned about this that Audubon needed to respond. So on the next slide, I tried to summarize what could be an even longer list of challenges. It's a pretty extraordinary moment that we're facing nationally, no matter what your concerns and interests are. And around race, I think the ongoing horror of broad daylight, on-camera murders of Black and Brown people in this country, juxtaposed against growing awareness of the decades of structural inequity continuing to take their toll, as well as political leaders who are leveraging white supremacy for their short-term political gain. Externally, it's a pretty bracing environment. Internally, Audubon has been for several years developing what we call equity, diversity, and inclusion competencies. So this is learning ways of working for leadership, for staff, for volunteers. And Germanique, our membership base is not quite as old on average as the trusts, but an average Audubon member is a white woman in her 60s who owns a home in the suburbs and has a college education. And has almost 50-50 odds of being moderate or conservative in her politics as liberal. So very likely someone who's never had to, as a white person of some degree of privilege, confront the legacy and current realities around racism in this country. And then because Audubon has been around for so long and is in fact named for, not founded by, John James Audubon, who has his own history, including owning enslaved Black people at certain points in his life. We just had an immense list of things to work through internally as well. But as I said, the question for us was not, do we take action, but what do we do and how? And how do we actually take some of these challenges as a mantle of responsibility or purpose? Mimi, to use the way that you framed this session. The fact that we have so many white Americans who strongly associate with Audubon as members and supporters, we believe actually gives us a significant degree of opportunity to introduce them to things that they've never had to think about elsewhere in their lives and move through to a place where they can be more constructive allies and American community members. So on the next slide, you can see what we did at first. This was very shortly after the video went viral of Christian Cooper's encounter. And we know that we have an opportunity with our membership because universally, regardless of political opinion, regardless of generation or life experience, Audubon members believe that everyone, regardless of race, should have access to the outdoors safely, should be able to enjoy birds, should be able to spend time in nature. That's a core value that we know our members have. So that's the entry point, right? How do we enter this conversation? It's around that shared value and how flagrantly everyone saw it violated in Christian Cooper's experience. So this was one of 3 tweets that serialized a media statement we made that day. We also did a version on Instagram. This tweet became our most engaged tweet ever in 11 years that we have been on the platform. So it just struck a deep chord, certainly with our existing membership, but also we saw folks like LeVar Burton and Sherilyn Eiffel sharing this as an example of an organization that has historically been led primarily by white people, owning our responsibility to call out racism and start to make a change. So that was the first step, right? We had to speak unequivocally, but also in a way that was authentic to our organization and to our values. And we were delighted to see that people responded so strongly to that. Now, within hours, the coverage had shifted from primarily focusing on Christian Cooper's experience to what everyone soon realized was the full horror of George Floyd's murder, and demonstrations started to grow around the country. So the next few weeks, there are many stories that unfold. Audubon's is not by any stretch the most important or the most prominent, but I hope that what we share can be helpful to some of you who are thinking about this for your organizations. So before we go to the next slide, I'll just hit a couple of these points that are then briefly illustrated on the next slide. We needed to make sure that our members, that media contacts we have, that our boards, we're hearing not from white people like me, who undoubtedly have a strong responsibility to speak out in these kinds of instances, but actually hearing directly from the people with the highest stakes in these conversations. And we'll show you a couple of ways that that manifested. This was also clear that it wasn't sort of a one-time reaction to something that happened externally, but that this was a necessity for us to accelerate the internal change that we've been undergoing and take really meaningful action, as well as examining some of our history that we've been able to conveniently ignore for many years. So on the next slide, these are just a couple of screenshots of some of the things that have happened over the summer and fall. One of the most exciting and uplifting was, to be clear, not something we initiated at Audubon, but was a grassroots movement of Black scientists and bird lovers and hikers and other outdoor enthusiasts who came together online to form something called Black Birders Week, where they were telling their stories, sharing pictures of themselves and their families on social media. So doing some editorial reporting and interviews with those folks was really exciting. We also, our social media director, Preeti Desai, is connected with some of these organizers of Black Birders Week, reached out and said, how can we help? This is your movement, but how can we help? And so we ended up hosting on the Audubon Facebook page a couple of conversations, which have over 250,000 views, where it was Black birders telling their own stories. We have an unequivocal Black Lives Matter statement out from our CEO. That was something that, an organization like ours with a broad, politically diverse constituency, I think overthought for a long time. Whatever the politics may be around that particular phrase, Black lives do matter, and we needed to say that very clearly on the record at the top of a communication, and we did. And then, as I said, we also have some overdue exploration of the history of John James Audubon, and then some of the folks who actually founded the organization many decades after his death. So on the next slide, as we wrap up my part, Mimi, did you want to jump in with anything?
No, I just thought I just think it's terrific, the authenticity with which you approach this campaign. I just think it's really meaningful. I mean, I think a lot of organizations were really trepidatious during this time period, especially one with Audubon's brand. And so I agree with the comment in the chat box that, bravo. I mean, it's really well done, but I want to hear the results. So keep going.
Sure, thank you. As I thought about how to frame the results in a couple of minutes here with all of you, I decided that I didn't want to talk about social media impressions or some of these things, which I have a program role at Audubon now, but I came up through public relations. And so I think very much in some of those terms, but this is not that kind of campaign, right? So what we've really seen, and here's some of the reactions on the left that I mentioned out of many thousands. What we've realized is that there's a moment here. And what the last few weeks of activity on our end have created is an opportunity. We have a chance to do some of the things that I tried to articulate on this slide. And I think some of the most exciting interactions that we've had, for example, when we did the Facebook Black Birders Week panels, a lot of our chapter leaders, a lot of our members were having these genuine and sometimes painful but productive learning moments and saying, I'm a 70-year-old white woman in the South, and I never thought about what it would be like to try to do activities I take for granted as a Black person. And there are lots of reasons to wonder why someone has never been forced to confront that at that point in their life. But you know what? She was having that moment that day. And so those genuine moments of learning, of openness, of listening, and of commitments to change have been powerful. And maybe one good way to sum that up, we had an Audubon chapter in North Carolina in the mountains around Asheville, who were named for someone who had not only been a slaveholder, but had actually published a book on why the Christian Bible defended the institution of slavery. And so that one of that person's descendants actually initiated a conversation in the chapter that led to them changing their name. And this was a group of largely older white individuals, many of whom were grappling with some of these issues for among the first times in their lives. But they said, you know what, this is no time to pussyfoot around the issue. The path is clear. We want to be an organization that's open and welcoming to all, and we can't be named for someone who vociferously upheld the institution of slavery. So we're now the Blue Mountains Audubon Society, which was wonderful. But this is years of work, right? This is not something where we can say, and so we passed the bill, and so we reached the fundraising goal. But we've responded to the moment in a way that creates all these open doors, we hope and believe, for the future, including systemic change, right? We're a conservation organization. We know that in many ways, communities of color, low-income communities, people who are immigrants and refugees bear the brunt of a lot of environmental crises. So who are we saving the environment for, right? Is it just wealthy white people who want to go hike and fish and camp? Or is it really for the benefit and uplift of all humanity, especially the people who have the most on the line? So on the next slide, I just wanted to leave you with a few lessons learned. I won't take time to read each one of these, but the top bullet there, we could not have met the moment in the way that we did if we had waited until May to start our journey and learning around equity, diversity, and inclusion with our leadership team. The fact that we had had so many of our leaders, including our CEO, key board members, go through various kinds of learning opportunities, workshops, training courses, doing readings, has positioned us to have both the courage and some of the knowledge base to do what we have. And so, if you're thinking about how would my organization meet this moment, or how did we over the summer, one of the things I can't encourage strongly enough is to think about those ways of learning and preparing, because you don't know when that next moment is going to hit home for your organization, and you do need to be ready. And then, as I said, we had to do this in a way that was connected to our mission and values. We're not an organization that focuses on poverty or racial justice or some of the other things that many other wonderful organizations do, but there is a very clear intersection between our mission, our outreach, our activities, and race. And so that's where we have to start that conversation from, and have the courage of our convictions to lead our members who may not quite be there yet or haven't thought about it to a place that is going to be constructive. And that can be scary, but it's also an immense opportunity. And then, of course, we have to do things that actually make a difference, right? So we published with our staff a 13-point plan around internal moves toward racial equity, everything from salary banding and pay equity to baseline training for all staff, to managing across difference training for managers, to how we're doing some of our goal setting to explicitly bake in equity and inclusion dimensions to our programmatic goals on an annual basis from this year on. And then, our success out of all of that is going to be measured by whether it really makes a difference, not by the fact that we tried. So Mimi, I think I will leave it there, and happy to answer questions if others have said.
No, this is terrific. I really appreciate that. And I think there will be more questions. I have a couple of questions, but let's sort of pause just so we can talk to the next really compelling issue of 2020, which was obviously COVID, and the United Nations Foundation and their campaign to really quickly and adroitly really address this issue and getting funds to those people. Rajesh, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. Thanks, everybody. What an amazing set of case studies we've heard from today. It's really inspiring. And just to pick up on David's point there about responding to the moment, I'm going to talk about work we've done this year to respond to the year's other big moment. No one wants to talk about COVID-19 again, but We learned something from this project that I think made us feel pretty good, actually. So if we can advance to the first slide, that would be great. I'm going to talk about the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund. This is how we responded when the World Health Organization came to us and said, can you help us build global solidarity? And if we go to the next slide. It started by thinking about the challenge. What was the challenge when they came to us in February of this year? In early 2020, this year, we saw an unprecedented threat that COVID-19 was spreading exponentially. It rapidly overwhelmed health systems, taking a huge toll on lives and livelihoods. And then between February and March, it quickly became apparent that this disease does not respect borders, that humanity is only as strong as our weakest, and that we all depend on each other. So when the World Health Organization came to us in late February for help in building global solidarity around a global response, we knew we had to move just as quickly. Next slide, please. So we set about creating the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund to respond to the fact that this was this exponential rise in cases that we'd seen around the world. Next slide, please. What we decided to do was that, we set a goal. We needed to help the World Health Organization quickly and as widely as possible disseminate accurate public health advice to stop the spread. We needed to drive fast donations to the World Health Organization for its globally coordinating role in driving the response. And as communicators, we wanted to position the UN Foundation at the heart of this unprecedented effort. So our strategy had to be, given the time that we had, i.e. none, and the fast moving situation, we needed to stay fast and we needed to be flexible on tactics. We needed to build and leverage diverse partnerships to maximize reach and engagement. And we needed to optimize channels, owned channels, earned channels, and donated media as well, because we arrived at this out of the blue. We didn't have a bespoke marketing and ad budget for this. So we basically had to, scrape everything that we could, pull in favors, use all the networks that we could, look down the back of the sofa for some spare change, anything we could basically throw at this effort. And basically, let me just set the scene for you. This was in the end of February. We were in the middle of running a gender equality campaign called Equal Everywhere. Its peak point was International Women's Day, March the 8th, and it was supposed to tail off, supposed to carry on until the end of March. March the 8th was the Friday. On the Sunday, I wrote a note to my entire team and said, we are pivoting hard and fast. And on the Monday morning, we set to work on building the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund, and we launched it in 4 days. It was just an insane effort to get this out the door, but we had to move that quickly because the pandemic was racing ahead of all efforts to contain it. So we thought, okay, well, what do we do first of all? The most important thing, first of all, is to build a convenient donor website that's focused on our own channels, because we have ultimate control over those. We didn't have enough time to get on board a PR firm, a media firm, and really lay the ground for a big media push later on. We had to just throw everything at this and get it out the door. So we built a convenient donation platform. We focused on our own channels. We secured matching campaigns from Facebook and Google to give us a good launch story. We held, a kind of pre-launch press conference. We leveraged relationships to get free advertising space on global media platforms. We provided toolkits to help our partners to tell the story of the fund themselves. And that's a really important point, which I'll talk about more in a second. And we seeded, at that very early point, we seeded conversations with many other partners about co-creating efforts later in the campaign. And to be honest, this flexible, phased strategy paid dividends later on. Now, what we saw is that when we launched, we had a high level of media engagement. We actually got the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, to announce the launch of the fund during his thrice weekly press briefings, which at that time, the world's media were tuning into. So we knew we could leverage that close relationship with the UN without having to spend on media and with speed, because that structure, that press conference was already in place to take advantage of that. So talk about leveraging partnerships. What we found is that we got influencers and the creative community to share both public health messaging and also to push their followers to give. And we had key partnerships, including, as you see there, Harry Styles. We had Rita Ora, Queen and Adam Lambert. If you remember in the summer, they did that amazing reworking of We Are the Champions. That was to benefit the Solidarity Response Fund. The Minions, the producers of the Minions, created a PSA using our messaging and our creative assets. All these partnerships, and here are some more that you can see on the screen that there's just some of the ones that we were able to benefit from. They brought us, we estimate, the collective reach of 1.3 billion people, which is, we'd never be able to do that on our own. It's astonishing. And that also translated to millions of dollars worth of free marketing. And some of the ways that we saw other people get involved were, merchandising efforts from the likes of Harry Styles or Rita Ora. Brands would give a percentage of their proceeds to the fund. And then there were the creative community efforts. So the Play On Fest was the Warner Music Group came to us and said, we're going to have a 3-day festival where we're just going to screen back-to-back existing concert footage, and we want you to be the beneficiary. Like, right, great, thank you very much, we'll take it. And then we worked with the gaming community, who really showed themselves to be amazing. We did a couple of efforts with them, Hope from Home with a couple of other organizations, and then Twitch StreamAid, working on the Twitch platform, which is favored by gamers, with the back-end use of Tiltify to donate. And we had these events where gamers would do what they do, which is just talk to their audiences, their own audiences on their own channels, but with an embedded donate button so people could donate via their channels. So we were reaching their audiences. And that was really, really critical, because these are, again, people that we wouldn't necessarily be able to reach ourselves. So if we can go to the next slide. The results were just extraordinary, first of all. Within 2 weeks, we crossed the $100 million mark in donations. In 6 weeks, we crossed $200 million, which, as you can imagine, just blew us all away. I mean, the whole effort from day one blew us all away. We were not prepared for the impact, and we were not prepared for the outpouring of global solidarity. And at the beginning, when I talked about, this awful pandemic and our response to the moment, made us feel good about one thing. It was the global solidarity that we saw around the world. These donations came from more than currently 633,000 people and companies around the world that have donated to the Solidarity Response Fund in the course of the last 6 months. And those resources, we're at $236 million now. Those resources have helped the World Health Organization deliver hundreds of millions of pieces of personal protective equipment, especially to countries that don't have robust health systems. It's helped them start and coordinate vaccine trials in over 100 countries, coordinate the global equipment supply chain, produce training tools for health workers in 29 languages, develop contact tracing programs and initiatives to combat misinformation. So what we learned from this campaign, and this is an organization that has not got a history of doing public-facing fundraising campaigns. What we learned is that you've got to move so quickly. Execution speed was absolutely key. That fast launch response, I think if we had waited, I think others would have jumped in. This was the cause of the moment. And we got out there quickly, and we leveraged every single partnership we could find. Throughout our 20-year history at the UN Foundation, we have made partnerships part of our DNA. And this was the day that we went through that entire Rolodex and just reached out to everybody we'd ever worked with and said, look, we have a feeling, we have a sense out there that people want to get involved. This is a way that they can get involved, because people understood that they could actually make a difference. So the second major lesson, I think, was flexibility and customization. We talked about leveraging those partnerships, but with the creative community, what we also did is, rather than just layer on a campaign and say, this is our campaign, you must run with this, we worked with them to be much more customizable and flexible. And also we said to them, you can reach your audiences in the most authentic way, much more authentically than we can. So here's the basics of our campaign. Here's the message. Here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's a couple of creative assets. If you want to use them, great. If not, we'll understand, fine. But if you can use this messaging, that will be fantastic. And then just go and do what you do. And that's what they did. And that's how we were able to get not just the donate message, but we expanded that to a set of 5 messages, 5 things everyone can do to stop the spread. And they were: wear a mask, know the symptoms, keep physically distant from people, be kind to each other right now, because no one needs everyone to be a jerk, right? And if you can, donate. So we embedded our core campaign message into a wider set of messages that resonated much more widely and allowed different people with different specific interests to tap into the message they wanted to take the campaign forward to their audiences in the most authentic way. And that's why I think we saw the huge number of celebrity and creative community and media partners that came to help us out. And the last lesson, I think, is message simplicity. And this helps, it helps to have no time to get something out the door, right? But, you know, coming from a journalism and a news background like I do, I always found the best scripts were the ones that you wrote on the fly with a deadline looming. And so with this, we had no time to overthink this. And our message was really sticky and really straightforward. Everyone everywhere is at risk, and everyone everywhere can do something to help. And it seemed that with the speed of the campaign, we tapped into that feeling around the world. And that's why we ended up with the enormous success that we ended up with, which was just humbling and overwhelming. And yeah, we hope has made a difference in the world and to the global response. So I'll stop there, and like my colleagues, happy to take in some questions.
No, that was great. And so interesting too, because really the leveraging of partnerships, I think so often we think of partnerships as, you know, a nice to have. And this was obviously something that was forward the whole time and part of the, as you were saying, the DNA of the United Nations, because you've been doing these partnerships for so many years. They came home to roost as part of a key tactic of this campaign, which is, to me, super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we would never think about doing this without reaching out to partners, but we also knew, okay, if we're going to make a difference, we can't do this on our own. So how do we make partnerships that are authentic? How do we build partnerships around this campaign that are really authentic, that are really co-created things, efforts with other people?
Right. So this is my recommendation. Let's remove the slide deck so we can see everybody, because we have some good questions and I think they apply to everybody. So I'd love to give everybody a chance to respond. And I think the first one is terrific. From Parker, I'm going to say his last name, Schaffel, so I'm hoping that's right. Germanique mentioned the organization already had trust established before it announced and launched the new initiative. Would the strategy have been different if that trust wasn't already established? How can organizations which don't have that broad trust still launch successful purpose-driven initiatives? And I think this is a great question because so many of us have worked at nonprofits. I know I did for many years that did not have name recognition and didn't really have, as the our question don't have trust. So Germanique, why don't you start and then I'll move around the room.
Yeah, this is a great question. And, you know, I think it is an opportunity to reflect as an institution on what do you need to be doing to establish trust so that you're not launching initiatives that kind of land flat because people don't believe them. You know, that doesn't feel right. You know, the idea that you're talking about things that just don't align at all with the way that you've represented yourself in terms of your mission and the values of your institution. So, I mean, that's like the first thing, like, oh, well, what work do we need to be doing if this is the kind of purpose-driven work that we want to start to launch into the world? Then what shifts might we be making internally to be successful? Because I would hate to say, yeah, just go ahead and launch the initiative, because that's absolutely not the right thing to do. But as I was listening to my colleagues, and I just want to take a moment to say, incredible work Incredible work. It was just so wonderful to sit back and listen to all the work that you all have done. But as I was listening to my colleagues, the couple things, that you said, David, when you talked about this is your movement, but we can help. That's one way to think about an approach as an organization to launch an initiative. It's about those partnerships. It's about listening. It's acknowledging that, hey, we want to be in this fight with you, but we're not going to launch some initiative. We're gonna go where the work is already happening, where the movement is happening, and see how we can be helpful. And you build the trust by being a great partner first before you try to take the lead and take the reins. So that's what I would say in that situation, is start to build that trust in the community and really be helpful and a good partner. And that's where you get that credibility to be able to then be a leader in some of these spaces. But I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say.
I actually would echoing everything you said, Germany. I mean, I was going to say an answer to that question for me would be build the right partnerships, humbly and authentically go to people who are credible in that space and say, we want to learn, help us learn. You can't go out there because you'll be torn apart. And honestly, I think the Black Lives Matter movement over the summer has really done that to a lot of organizations who've come out with statements that are, empty and have really been ripped to shreds as a result. And so I think you've got to be authentic about it, and you've got to understand and take a moment to look inside and soul search and say, oh, okay, right, we're not credible here. We know we need to be. We need to have this conversation. So who is credible? How can we work with them?
And it needs to have some meaningful action. You can't just have that statement and not have it follow up with action. And David, that's a great question for you. You had said that you had some actions, like some focus groups or such. Can you elaborate on some of the other action that your campaign was working on around this?
Sure, and you're absolutely right. You can't just put up a hashtag on Twitter and Instagram and call it a day, right? I mean, this is about fundamental change across the board at every institution in this country. And all the levers that each of us personally and institutionally have on the broader levers of power in American society. So, what I would say, Mimi, is that first off, within a couple of weeks of May 25th, which started for us a new phase of all of this work at Audubon, we had put together an action plan that I mentioned briefly that was largely internally focused, but it's a lot of capacity building work for us as we work in community and in partnership. But it's also a lot of responsibility for our staff. We're about a 700-person employee base, which to some of you probably sounds huge and to some of you probably sounds pretty small. But that's a lot of lives and careers that we're also responsible for, right? And so from that internal stewardship to every facet of our externally facing work, we have a series of things that we've identified to start going after. And I mentioned some of them, but I think maybe the question about how you communicate with those constituencies is an important part of that, because it's one thing to make a statement and then build a plan, but then how do you keep that communication going? And I would say briefly that, like everything in 2020, it's a multi-channel and largely virtual for now effort. So everything from internally, all staff emails, Q&As with the CEO, to staff focus groups and task forces, to then report out to the board. We just had a virtual national board meeting and reported on status for a lot of these activities, but then appropriately also sharing externally. So some of this stuff we have not posted on our website, but a lot of it we have, because we want our members to know what's happening. We want other organizations to be able to learn or to help us learn, because certainly haven't figured it out. So, that's why I say this is a long-term commitment, and we're going to measure success by, where we are in a couple of years. So we'll see.
Thank you. The next question is from Marlena, and Ed, I might send this one over to you because I know how the Gates Foundation works, and often you can be a very small team within a very large organization, is my understanding. So her question is, she says, thank you for this incredibly informative, thought-provoking session. Really appreciate seeing examples of campaigns from various communicators. As someone who works on a very small team, I'm a team of one communications professional. I'm wondering if you have any advice for how to build capacity or how to prioritize in order to have the most impact on your campaigns. Obviously, partnerships are one that we've identified, but Ed, talk to us about maybe some other ways that as a smaller communications operative, you would prioritize some of your campaign objectives and or strategies or tactics in order to have a campaign that is impactful.
Well, the greatest tool that we have found is the use of social media, just because it has such great reach, and being able to post a video or even a slide card on a social media channel and encourage everyone within the organization and everyone we know to amplify it. That's where we get the most response. And in particular to our videos, we got very high click-through rates, and for people looking at the application for our RFP. And I think that if you're not making use of social media channels, and all of them, not just Twitter and Facebook, but most especially LinkedIn, I would say, you're missing opportunities to to grow the substance of your team and amplify your own message.
Right. Others on the panel, what are your thoughts? Obviously, social media, and you want to make sure you've got some paid targeting behind it, because then you can really identify the audience that you're trying to reach. Other thoughts, Germanique?
Yeah, I have a question around budget with that question. Is it a small staff, but do you have resources? Because what we've always done when we need to flex really large is to hire a PR firm to get some additional capacity for just a short-term period. Make it very kind of streamlined, like we need you to do X for us to help to amplify the work. So oftentimes it's about being able to leverage outside support. The other thing that we've done, I've done in cases, is where you'd be surprised what you might find within your own institution. They may not have the title of communications, but there might be someone who's a great writer who you can work with. Obviously, kind of working in the dynamics of your own organization and how well that's received. But we've often been able to flex people into who've got some skills to be able to help add an additional hand around a particular initiative and campaign. I think being very purposeful about what the goal of the campaign is, and then laser-like focus on what must you achieve to receive the outcome is also very important. So having a strategic plan to guide you so that you're not just going all over the place, but you're very clear that I'm one person. We're trying to achieve this. Here's my strategic plan. This is how I'm going to get there. This is the support, the additional support that I need. A roadmap is always a safe bet in terms of being able to kind of manage those types of capacity issues as well.
If I can just,
Josh, absolutely.
I think the importance of a plan and a roadmap is something that we learned from the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund for future efforts, because we were basically building the plane as we flew it with that one. And now we have another health campaign out in the market right now, which we were able to plan a little bit more strategically around, which we're quite pleased about. But the point about how do small teams manage on campaigns? One tactic that I'm a big fan of, and this comes from my background as a broadcast journalist, is reversioning content. So, when I was a reporter at the BBC, we'd be covering stories for television, for radio, for online, and for social as well. And you can do one interview that will cover you for all these different platforms. So, if you're thinking, what is the content I need to produce for this? Think about, okay, if I do one video interview with our CEO or the kind of key person in this project, then you have a video, you have clips for social, you have quote tweets, quote graphics right there, and you can write it up as a blog post, and you have a pitch for media as well right there. So reversion, just plunder your piece of content for everything you can get out of it, and don't be ashamed about it. Cannibalize everything. There should be nothing but bones left on the carcass of that piece of content when you're done with it.
Never get tired of your content before your audience does. And that takes a long time in my experience.
Yeah.
And I would just add, find your moment. When is the wind going to catch the little kite that you can put up into the air? And sometimes you're going to guess right, sometimes you're going to guess wrong, but those moments are so important to really propel momentum for you.
It's so true. Another great question. Thank you all for sharing these powerful stories. Jesse Vernon says, David emphasized the importance of centering those with the highest stakes. Do any of the panelists have thoughts on how communications can amplify those voices without placing undue burdens on them? This can be particularly challenging in a for-profit organization where asking underrepresented people to share their stories can feel like asking them to do work above and beyond their day jobs. Who wants to take this one? David, like you're nodding your head. Thoughts?
Well, I can make a couple of comments. I probably shouldn't have the loudest voice on this, but thank you for the question. It's really important to recognize. I would say if you're in a for-profit organization, frickin' pay people. I know that for-profit organizations have budgets too, but relative to a nonprofit context, especially a smaller one, figure out how to pay people. Across the board, I would say a lot of this needs to be opt-in, especially when we're at those highest moments of pain, uncertainty, risk, fragility. So with Black Birders Week, for example, as I said, that wasn't something that we ginned up, where we were going around trying to convince people to do this. This was a grassroots groundswell of people saying, we want to tell our own stories, we want to share our own images, and we want folks to hear us, see us, and learn. And so in that case, it was a matter of saying, as we've discussed, how can we help? Versus us trying to force something that people weren't ready for or equipped for in the moment. So looking for those moments when people are saying, hey, I've got something to say, it can be part of the solution. But again, I think others should have a stronger voice in this.
I would add to that, people want to tell their stories. If asked, if I learned anything as a reporter, people want to not only talk about themselves, but get you to understand their motivations and why they do what they do. And so, not being afraid to ask is important too. I mean, it often will not be viewed as a burden on someone if you ask them to tell their story in a way that really identifies them and shows where they're coming from.
I think that's a great point.
I have to agree. Yeah, I have to echo that. I mean, if you're authentic about the desire for these other underrepresented voices to be centered in conversations, I think people from those communities welcome that and want to have that opportunity. But the request needs not to feel like it's only benefiting the organization, right? And that it's coming when the organization wants it. It's got to feel.
My friendly supporters said, though, right now it's too important a time to be precious. So ask and move ahead.
Yeah.
Can I just comment on that point? That is something that we have found to be a bit of a challenge with the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund, trying to tell authentic stories on the ground, because especially, the ground for us is not just the US, the ground for us is the world. So we've been reliant on the World Health Organization and other partners through the UN system, like the Refugee Agency, UNHCR, who we've always also worked with on this, to help get us those stories. But we also have to be very mindful of the fact that actually they're busy fighting a pandemic. So we have found it's been difficult to get those stories from the ground. And we know from fundraising that it's those stories from the ground that are going to drive fundraising. So we've had to use as kind of wide a lens as we can and say, okay, we're interested in stories in these 10 countries. Fine. And whenever you can get them to us, get them to us. So it's not really a solution to this question and aren't a response to this question, but what we did is just go wider, just go wider. Don't just specifically target who you want to tell a story from, because we should not be expecting the World Health Organization, when it's fighting a pandemic, to be trying to do this work for us right now on the ground. It's too hard. And the people we want to talk to are the first responders. Guess what? They've got lives to save. So you know what? In this instance, our fundraising campaign and the storytelling needs for it might need to take a backseat, and that's okay. But go wide. Just ask for as many as you can, and some will come. And then just do your best with those.
I think going wide is really important, and I think it does solve a bit of that problem that you were just speaking, that the person had that question. The last is from Sarah Marston. She has a question for Rajesh. Rajesh, I enjoyed seeing you speak and working with your colleagues when you were at the Center for Global Development in my previous role leading communications for a small Gates Foundation grantee focused on global health funding. Your emergency fundraising campaign is impressive. As time has progressed and the COVID burden has continued, how are UNF and partners continuing to communicate, I think you were just talking to this, longer term around COVID fundraising? So how do we avoid audience fatigue, I think, around, this emergency? I mean, we're starting to see it, unfortunately, already with mask wearing, right? And social distancing, we're starting to see fatigue, let alone around our campaigns. So that's a great question.
So I think this is a great question, Sarah. Thank you so much. I would say that what we are deploying now is what I call the Gates tactic. And the brilliance of the Gates Foundation is that despite the fact that he has all this money, he understands that he can't make the Gates Foundation understands that it can't make the change it wants to see in the world unless governments are involved. Even Gates with his $100 billion or whatever, $40 billion endowment is not enough for the kind of change they want to see in the world. So the fund, the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund, is now the second largest single contributor to the World Health Organization's global response. The German government is the largest, governments are all the others, and the Gates Foundation. That's who will really fund the response. Our effort was get it on people's radars, help them understand that this is a global problem that can only have a global solution, and that we did a little bit, but actually others need to really step up. And we're working this idea into a lot of our campaigns and messaging going forward. So, we work also, it's not just about fundraising for the World Health Organization and the UN system, it's about being on side in the campaigns and the messaging that they're using. So for example, making sure that we are pushing the message that when a vaccine is available, it is developed and distributed equitably, especially to people who can't afford it. That's key. So we are adopting some of that messaging now in this part of our own campaign, because that fits in with the idea of everyone everywhere being affected and everyone everywhere having a role to play. We're also seeing, and I'll be quite honest about this, is that there was a peak in fundraising, and with fundraising campaigns you see that, especially in emergency fundraising campaign, as we've learned, you go for broke, and then it really tails off. So it has really kind of slowed down now. And we're not looking at sustaining the fund at that level. I mean, frankly, I don't think I could do that to my team either. That wouldn't be fair on them or myself. But we've made a splash, we've made a difference, and now we have the standing to be able to say to others, you've got to step up now. And so that's part of our messaging. And we're working this into, we have a health campaign out in the market now called Unite for Health, which again reflects some of this messaging, and the work on the fund is part of that campaign, but it's also about the other work that the UN Foundation does on global health systems, making them stronger. So we can fit it into those other campaigns as well.
Okay. I think we have now hit the end of our program. We've run 15 minutes over, but it's been a great conversation. Thank you to you all. I really appreciate you being here today. I'm Mimi Carter from Proof Strategies. Thank you to Rajesh Merchandani for being here with us from the United Nations, David Ringer for being with us from Audubon Foundation, Germanique for being with us from the Lucas Foundation, Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, and Ed Wyatt for being with us from the Gates Foundation. Thank you all so much. It was great. And thank you for your presentations today. They were terrific.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you so much. We'll be sending out more information and links to this recording in case you want to share it with your staff. We'll also be sending out other resources. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.